It's been 2 years since the terror attack that triggered Israel's war in Gaza. On October 7th of 2023, Hamas-led militants stormed army bases, kibbutzes, and the Nova Music Festival, killing some 1,200 people, mostly civilians. They also abducted 251 others. 2 years. But it's been 77 since the start of the conflict. And from the outset, many mainstream media acted like October 7th was the genesis. Here is Novara Media.
After October the 7th, media repeatedly asked this question.
Do you condemn what Hamas did?
Do you support what Hamas launched?
Will you now take the opportunity to condemn what Hamas did on October the 7th?
Though you cannot condone the killing of civilians in Israel, can you?
Now, that question served to frame anyone who was trying to contextualize the day or raise concerns about Israel's response as illegitimate. This was an attempt to silence any speaker sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, including almost every Palestinian invited on air, by casting them as suspicious.
For as long as activist scholars and Arab media have called it genocide, mainstream media in the West have avoided that term. There's been heated debate in newsrooms, including here at France 24. There have been even resignations over editorial values and accusations of bias at the New York Times, Reuters, and the BBC. The West was covering the war, but as Palestinian journalist Anan Kuzmar told the Take podcast, the issue was how it did so.
Most of the incidents are reported, but the way they are framed, how much weight these claims were given, and the way they were presented, equivalent to the counterclaims and the license to slander and accuse every Palestinian, whether journalist, poet, or whatever, of being a legitimate target of Israel's military campaign, has enabled the continuation of the killing campaign against our journalists.
Historian Dr. Arsal Rad has become something of a sub-editor on social media for fixing headlines like this and also contrasting a double standard, like when the New York Times called out Russia for using hunger as a weapon of war, whereas a paper said Gazans were merely searching for food, with no mention of Israel's blockade. In her latest piece, she said, quote, "By refusing to name the crime or the criminal, Western media is engaging in genocide denial. And history will judge the complicit." Now, media plays a vital role in shaping the narrative, and that is one reason why Israel doesn't allow foreign journalists into Gaza and why so many Palestinian journalists have been killed. In fact, more journalists have been killed in Gaza than in both world wars, Vietnam, Yugoslavia, and Afghanistan combined. Here is TRT's The Newsmakers.
Beyond headlines, press freedom itself has come under fire. Rights groups warn that the killing of reporters and the blocking of access to Gaza point to something deeper.
The only conclusion that you can come to is to behave like this is that Israel is behaving like this because it has something to hide.
In Gaza, bombs erase lives. In newsrooms, words can erase truths. For Palestinians, both wounds cut deep. And both will shape how this war is remembered.
Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur for the Occupied Palestinian Territories, says she plans to investigate the media's role in one of her upcoming reports. For more, let's speak to our guest, Dalia Hatuqa, independent Palestinian journalist. Hello to you, Dalia. First question, we're going to look at Israeli media, Palestinian media, and international media. But in terms of what's being shown in Israel, have you noticed any changes in the coverage?
Essentially, I would say no. I would say that the Israeli media wartime system consisted of the following: censorship, embeds, and very narrowed frames. Israel's media operates under the military censor, as a lot of people know, and emergency laws. Foreign press access to Gaza has been largely blocked, except on Israeli military escorted tours. And even the High Court has rejected multiple petitions for independent access. The parliament empowered the government to shutter foreign broadcasters, and this was used to close Al Jazeera's Israel operations. The regime basically sharply constrains what Israelis and any embeds could see and say. So these controls, plus the legal threats, have channeled the Israeli coverage toward security frames. the targeting of Hamas, the tunnels, the hostages, and away from the on-ground Gaza perspectives. I believe that also broadcast environment has hardened inside Israel. So authorities, for example, seized AP gear over a live Gaza feed, later reversed amid backlash, and banned Al Jazeera, as I mentioned. But domestic TV in Israel largely minimizes Gazan suffering. Independent alternative outlets and press freedom groups document a broader media blackout effect and the toll on journalists. So with embedded reporting, heavy censor review, and closure of critical channels, mainstream narratives in Israel center on national defense and hostage rescue, with less sustained visibility with Gaza's civilian experience.
And if you contrast that Israeli media coverage with what we're seeing in the West, what distinctions would there be? Are you seeing any prevailing narratives in Western media?
Unfortunately, in Western media, I would say that the genocide in Gaza has been framed as a conflict or a war or counterterrorism in which Israel must target militant groups, i.e. Hamas, even at the risk of civilian harm. So Israel's actions are then justified as self-defense. So this kind of framing sidelines or minimizes responsibility for civilian suffering, and it normalizes civilian harm as collateral damage. Overall, I would say US and European media, for whom I work with, I've noticed has also presented Israeli and Palestinian suffering as morally equivalent, despite the differences in large numbers of deaths and injuries, or emphasized Israeli victimhood to counterbalance Palestinian losses. This kind of situation has reduced the moral asymmetry and has obscured structural dynamics such as power, the presence of the Israeli occupation, the blockade or the siege that has been imposed by Israel on the Gaza Strip since 2007. And I would say many media outlets have focused on the genocide in Gaza only through a humanitarian lens. Yes, the Israelis haven't really touched upon that, and I believe that Western media has touched upon these issues, but even emphasizing, displaced people, destroyed infrastructure, famine, medical crisis, all of them are important, of course, but they're devoid of context and culpability or political causes. I think it's important to pause here and note that propaganda is not only about disinformation, it's about the cumulative effect of repeated framing, selective omission, and normalization of certain discourses.
Yeah, and Dalia,
finally,
sorry,
and this is true.
Sorry, just wanted to step in there on that point there. When we're talking about the way that is reported in Western media, it can be done via a passive voice, like X amount of Palestinians killed without saying who killed them or why and how they died. It can also play up the humanitarian angle, as you were discussing. But I'm curious, the journalists who are writing those pieces and the sub-editors who are looking at them and writing the headlines, do you think they're intentionally doing what they're doing, or is this part of a subconscious system they're not even aware of?
I can't really speak to, what's in their hearts and what's in their minds, but what I've noticed is that a lot of journalists already have preconceived notions of what happens in Israel and Palestine, and this has been true since even before I started covering the Palestinian Intifada in 2002. I would say it's easy to kind of fall back on tropes such as, Palestinians are dangerous, Palestinians don't love, Palestinian moms don't love their children, things of that nature. And it's just an easy way out. I think it takes a lot of guts and it takes a lot of courage to be able to snap out of that and see the bigger picture.
Recently, we've been hearing a little bit, but more and more, journalists standing up to Israel saying, why don't you let foreign journalists in to verify what's happening? If you don't let us in, then we assume you're hiding something in Gaza. That is a very salient point to make, but does it perhaps overlook the work that Palestinian journalists are doing in Gaza and the people who are actually risking their lives every day and covering it as we speak?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a point there. I think the two, can go hand in hand. So I do believe that journalists should be allowed to go inside Gaza, and they should be able to cover the atrocities that are being perpetrated there. At the same time, I think we should also, tip our hats to Palestinian journalists who have not only been living through this genocide, but also covering it. Even as they've lost, their children, or they've lost their spouses, or they've lost limbs, families. They've been displaced several times. So all of this, I think we should give props to these Palestinian journalists that have been doing this kind of work in horrendous situations. But also, it makes us think that whenever we say we need independent journalists to go inside Gaza, we are dismissing these Palestinian journalists as anything but independent.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering, does that test your faith in journalism? We adhere to a number of values, and it might change depending on which part of the world we practice in, but there are values at the heart of journalists, and that sort of creates this brotherhood or sisterhood, if you will. Has it tested your faith and belief in what you do for a living?
Absolutely, all the time. And this didn't just happen in October 7th. This has happened for a long time, especially since the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, an Al Jazeera journalist who was Palestinian American. She was my friend, and I saw her being killed on TV, basically. And since then, I've been, thinking about this. It's a very important question. At the same time, I still believe that journalism is important, and I believe that the rise of social media and citizen journalism is also important, because it's increased the volume and the capacity of people to release the personal testimonies and to provide alternative narratives from Gaza. So yeah, it's a good question, and
Right.
I think about it every day, actually.
Dalia, thank you so much for your time. Dalia Hatuqa, Palestinian independent journalist, joining us from Amman. Thank you. And that brings us to our quote of the week, and it comes from an essay published by the Media Diversity Institute. It says, quote, "The question is no longer if Gaza marks a tipping point for global press freedoms, but whether the world has the will to prevent its collapse. Gaza is not only a Palestinian story, but a frontline test of global democracy. If journalism dies here, the right to truth dies everywhere." Thank you for watching this edition of Scoop, and please stay tuned to France 24.